Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness, and Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today, I am sharing about my fertility journey because big announcement, I'm pregnant right now, but it has been quite the journey to get here. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Do you have any initial questions for me, Donovan?
I think it'd probably be good to start with just like a high level overview of your story so far, like where you're at.
Yeah, so I know last year I had shared about my miscarriage, and actually we shared it into two parts because it was essentially two parts in reality and how it played out. Yeah, so I mean, that was kind of like the beginning of the journey. Well, I mean, if you really want to go way back, and I'll probably dive into this a little bit more, but I'll kind of just start from where we kind of left off with the miscarriage because that was my very first pregnancy ever, and we were doing IVF. So I was actually, and it actually took the first cycle of IVF, which I was like surprised and excited for, and shocked all at the same time. So I was like, wow, maybe getting pregnant is easier than I thought when I got pregnant for the very first cycle of IVF. But that ended up not being the case in at least my journey for getting pregnant. And what happened is, even though I did get pregnant from my first cycle, I just kind of like a recap for those who didn't watch or listen to the miscarriage stories. The quick recap is that I went in for my week 10 visit with my midwife, and she told me that it looked like the embryo, or not quite a fetus yet, had stopped growing around 7.5 weeks, and it's kind of floating in there. And so I was just going to allow it to pass naturally, which actually took quite a bit of time. 3 weeks later, it still hadn't passed. And so I was like, I'm going to just take the medication, allow it to pass that way because I had my brother's wedding coming up. Didn't want to have to deal with that potentially. And then I thought I was done with it. And then 2 weeks after that, I had massive bleed outs for a week and finished my miscarriage. So it was quite the horrific ordeal, both emotionally and physically. But I was able to, grieve and recover, and our couples therapist recommended writing a letter to our baby. So we did, and that kind of helped with the grieving process, as well as, sharing and connecting with friends who had been through that journey themselves. So, it took a while because that happened around April of 2022 of last year. And so it really took a toll on my mental and emotional health for the year. It was really hard to work on or even focus on my business for a while. And then I actually got COVID too, right after having my miscarriage to top things off. And it took a while to get my period again, essentially. Like, I don't remember how long it took. But I think the next time we tried was in July. Yes. Yeah. So we waited a few months for my periods to come back and for me to kind of feel like I was in a better place. So like 3 months after the miscarriage, we tried for our second cycle. I was thinking it would just go smoothly. And for that second cycle, it didn't tick. So I was like, okay, no big deal. Most likely the next one will. So we were just planning and gearing up for the next cycle. But we actually ended up taking a break because the IVF clinic was closed. And we actually went to Italy in August. So I think that was a good way to kind of recover and revive myself in a way and just kind of relax about all the stress that the IVF process takes. But the clinic was closed in September. But I wanted to take some time to kind of really work on myself, getting my nutrition back on track, losing a little weight after Italy, because I definitely gained some weight from that. So then we tried again in, oh wait, no, actually, August. No. Oh, actually, maybe we tried in June, and then it was July and September is when we tried for the second and third cycle. And so September was the third cycle. And I thought, oh yeah, third time's a charm. This one's gonna be it. And then it wasn't. And so that was devastating in itself and surprising. And it just, even though intellectually I could understand why, it's the odds are, every 3 cycles or so, it's like a 30% chance or something like that, I think is the statistic. And more so when you're over 35, and I am a little over 35. And so when I was going into my fourth cycle, which was in October, I was literally, I actually thought from the hormones that I had to take from the IVF process, I didn't feel like that changed my mood too much, or it didn't make me too overly emotional, because I didn't know, maybe it did. You can ask my husband, I'm not sure. But it wasn't until the fourth cycle that I was like an emotional wreck by that point, because it was like fourth time, and like I was feeling okay, and then like the littlest things would go wrong. Like for my ultrasounds, it wasn't like ideal for my endometrial lining to go in, so I'd have to go in for another ultrasound, but then that pushed back my implantation date. And so it was just like all these little things that just would make me fall apart every single day up until like the implantation. Essentially, I was crying basically every day, really an emotional wreck for that process for the fourth cycle, even though it was like, oh, I've done this like 4 times already, I should should be a breeze, I know the process. But I think even though like intellectually I understood, it's not my fault, this is just kind of how it is, this is the odds, like underneath it all, I felt like, oh, there's something wrong with me, I must be broken, maybe this is never going to happen. Like these underlying negative thoughts kept like putting me in a very dark place emotionally. And so I was just kind of certain, because, my implantation date was pushed back a little bit, that it would just kind of throw everything off. So this one wasn't going to work. And surprisingly though, it did. And it was such a relief. But then, it's a relief to finally like get the positive pregnancy test. But then there's like the ongoing fear, which I didn't have my first pregnancy that had miscarried. Like, oh, now I have to make it through X timeline to feel like comfortable. And I'm still almost like waiting for that. I'm at like 22 weeks now. And even though it's like I'm well past my first trimester, halfway through my second trimester, I still feel this anxiety, less so once I got past the first trimester, but there's still that going on, like something could go wrong, and technically something could. And even my midwife at my last visit last week was like, the chances of a stillborn at my age after 35 is like 6 out of 1,000, which is pretty small odds. If I was under 35, it would be like 3 out of 1,000. So it's still like, unlikely, but it's just like, but what if is the ongoing thought process. But yeah, that's the long long overview of just the fertility journey part of it.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few directions we could end up taking this, but I think where I want to dig in a little bit, at least to start, we've talked quite a bit about the miscarriage part, but I'd be curious more on what do you feel like would be useful for other people to know who are considering sort of the IVF process, having gone through it multiple rounds, now that you have had some experience going through it?
Yeah, I'd say, don't necessarily give up hope. It's and understand that it's going to be a roller coaster of a journey. Maybe not for everyone, but for a lot of women, it's challenging and it's a struggle. And don't compare yourself to other women, I think is important because, it is get frustrating when you hear of like, oh, I wasn't even trying to get pregnant and I got knocked up just like that. Or and when you've been really struggling for a few years with that, some people even longer than a couple of years, like I have been, that we've been trying. So don't compare yourself, I think is important, and also get support. Um, I shared before having support from women in my life, both who have had a miscarriage and both who haven't, was really essential. Like people who've been through the pregnancy journey, whether it was smooth or different. Um, and I've actually discovered an app called Peanut, which is an app to meet other pregnant ladies or other mothers, essentially. So you can share their journey. And actually, I've met with two women from that app because, it's nobody fully, like, even as much as your significant other can empathize with the struggles of just pregnancy alone, they can't really, and they can understand like the struggles of getting pregnant because they were there alongside you. It's helpful to, I think, talk with other women who are going through that process or who've been through that process. And actually, I connected with one woman who had a very similar story. I didn't know until we like were chatting over coffee that, she also had a miscarriage. Like she's pregnant around a similar due date as myself. But for her second one, she just like similarly to me, like she didn't even like share about being pregnant with her friends until like basically the baby was about to come with. And I waited about 5 months to finally feel comfortable enough to share. And even still, I'm a little hesitant, but that's the other thing. It's just like, there's no wrong or right time to share, and that's like at your own discretion. The other thing I want to share for people that are trying to be supportive of friends or family members in their life that are trying to get pregnant is to don't constantly ask them, so are you pregnant yet? That is a really pet peeve because it's like you have no idea how big of a struggle is. It's like if I feel comfortable to share that with you, then I will. And it's like if you're asking me and I'm not even quite ready to share that piece with me because I'm waiting to get past the first trimester or however long I feel comfortable, that's on me. So I did like harp on a friend who did ask me, so are you pregnant yet? I was just like, so I gave her a stern talking and told her how inappropriate that was, and then shared that I was pregnant. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we talked about it before when we were touching on this topic in sort of other ways in the past, but I recall talking about how some people don't recognize how heavy, I don't know if heavy is the right word. I'll use it anyway though. How heavy the process can be for people, or
Yeah.
how about that? Emotionally taxing, right? Some
Yes.
people don't realize how emotionally taxing the individual journey can be, and by just sort of like talking about these things in a trivial way can come out um just as sort of like insensitive or uncaring. And
Mhm.
I recall that from the last time is just like something that was also highlighted. So it's very clear to me that it's something to for someone like myself, like I'm never going to have that actual experience, at least treating it with some like uh understanding that there is a high likelihood that there's emotional burden tied with it for the other person, uh, probably make my behavior a little bit better.
Mhm.
On a similar note, I would be curious. So you mentioned basically like you've gone through the process a couple times, and logically you've been able to get through sort of like, hey, these are the odds. Hey, I went through this round and it didn't take because statistically that's pretty probable.
Mhm.
But still had the emotional taxation of like the process. I would be curious if there are other things that you think are useful for anyone considering the process to expect in terms of maybe like anything that caught you off guard, or like anything that you like? For example, if I don't know if this would have been helpful at all, but if somebody told you beforehand, like, hey, you might know the numbers, but there's also a very high chance that like it's still not going to feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's like I knew the statistics and I still like felt like shit for a good amount. And during that fourth cycle when I was just falling apart over every little thing, was a wreck about lots of different things. I decided to go back to therapy, actually hypnotherapy, to get like support that I hadn't seen my hypnotherapist in about a year, I think. And I was feeling mostly, even like when I had my miscarriage, I didn't even like go back to deal with it because I like honestly felt like the support from my friends was sufficient for me. Although I did talk to my couples therapist about it, but I didn't talk to my hypnotherapist about it. But because I was falling apart, I got professional support, and that kind of helped me understand like it's how much pressure I was putting on myself. And this is something I want to share with the women out there that are really trying to have a baby right now, or the people just trying to have a baby right now, that the pressure I was putting on myself was obviously creating a lot of stress on my body, and that's probably not helping the situation, for one. But it actually goes back to, not only had we been trying IVF for almost a year at that point, as well as trying to get pregnant for like 2 years at that point. It goes well beyond the 2 years, because I've wanted a kid for my whole life, as long as I can remember. And actually, if you look like 10 years back, and I was in a relationship that ended, four-year relationship that ended because we weren't on the same page with the kids thing, because he wasn't a no, he was just not sure, and he was still unsure after 3.5 years. So I was like, I can't just wait indefinitely for you. And then with my current partner, and we've been together for 4.5 years now, almost 5 years now. It wasn't, there were, even though he wanted to have kids, there were still struggles of getting on the same page with, like, his thing was like, oh, we got to get our finances in order before we start trying. My thing is like, I'm getting older and I don't have all the time in the world to get that all squared away. So there was conflicts about that. So it's just like, if you look at like the decade of like wanting this so much and just having it like being slapped down or rejected, or the source of breakups and heartache and pain, to get where I am now, it was literally like wrapped up in all that pressure that like just had to come out in tears in so many different ways, like that week or two of trying again for that fourth cycle. And I have to say that also know your limits. It's like, you don't necessarily, if you feel like you're like not in an emotional space to try, look, self-reflect and see, is like, is this because I feel like, am I trying because I feel so pressured to do it and I have like no time? Would it be okay to take a break from this for a month or two? Is that possible, and try again? Or is this like, I think for some women who've done more than 4 cycles, or whether they can't do it financial reasons or emotional reasons, whatever reason, it's like sometimes there are plenty of women that don't get the positive outcome of a positive pregnancy test, and that's heartbreaking in itself, because it's giving up like a dream that you might have had for a really long time.
I think you mentioned a couple things that I want to highlight. The first one is, I think it's a good point to sort of, if you know you're going to try or have been trying and not feeling awesome, making sure that you identify extra sources of support, like you mentioned, like going back to your hypnotherapist that you hadn't seen for a long time. I feel like that's probably going to be like a really useful use of time, just to, because again, like you said, logically you might have it dialed in but emotionally you may need more support of different kinds that you just don't when you're trying, like when you're not
Mm-hmm.
trying this process.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that you highlighted that I think is important to hone in on is sort of the figuring out your relationship to the process, right? Because you mentioned like for you, like it's a long journey with something you like very highly desired for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that you would get frustrated more and more as things like don't go the way that you want.
Right.
And I think like digging into that relationship and sort of just exploring it early is probably going to be helpful, just in the same way that anytime any sort of any baggage or history or whatever you want to call it comes with you to into your life journey, like it's always just nice to have a good grasp on it early. Now I'm sure that you've like, with it being so important, have thought about it a lot and it's been present for you and stuff. But again, combining that with sort of some extra support, I imagine is not going to fully alleviate any emotional like hurt, but
Yeah.
it might lighten it a little bit. So those are some of the like big things that I thought were worth highlighting.
Mm. Yeah, definitely very important. And the thing I want to add to that is this idea of like you can be hopeful of a positive outcome, but it's like to some degree you have no control. You can do everything you can, which is what I did. But it doesn't guarantee an outcome. And that's very much like life. It's like there's not necessarily guaranteed outcomes. You can want things so bad. But you also have to like practice the not attaching to outcome, because like the more you attach to it, the more devastating it is. And it's, easier said than done. I was definitely attached to an outcome, but I try to rein myself in and remember that, it's like whatever happens, happens. If it's not this cycle, maybe it's the next one. I don't know how many cycles it's going to take. We're just going to do everything we can until we run out of like emotional and financial resources, and that's all we can do. Maybe it will pan out, maybe it won't. If it doesn't, maybe we'll adopt, or maybe we'll do something else. So that's kind of hard, but helpful to practice letting go of the outcome, which is super hard.
I've got to imagine too that it is extra difficult in this sort of situation because this is categorically different than
Mm-hmm.
other types of experiences, right? There are
Right.
things that are like um more transient, and I guess technically you could look at having a child this way, but I doubt many people do.
Mm-hmm.
But there's things like job opportunities or promotions or whatever else that come up that like while they can be important to you, it's probably to me it just seems like a completely different category of like creating another person.
Right.
There are few things that probably have that much like existential weight.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are already good at or like generally good at, oh, like I'm detached from this outcome and this one, like I feel like this is just a categorically different thing
Mm-hmm.
that if anyone is struggling with, should do their best to give themselves extra space emotionally, because it's just not there's not I don't know of any, I can't think of any like good parallels to this sort of like process.
Yeah, you're right. There aren't really, because even though technically you can't control, there are like some things in life you do have more say in and more likelihood of achieving the outcome, like getting my medical degree. It's like, okay, if I stick to it, do my classes, take the tests, follow through, do what I need to pass the quarter every quarter, and just keep at it, then eventually I'll get there, and that's like a predictable outcome. But with pregnancy, it's like, yeah, you can do all the things to do, and it doesn't necessarily guarantee an outcome, and it kind of sucks. And it's heartbreaking, but it's kind of how it goes. So yeah.
I also just feel like it's something that changes I don't know, maybe not everyone feels this way, but like it's it's an experience that would change your life so much more drastically than the vast majority of other things that are
Mm-hmm.
out there. Like once you have a kid, you don't not have a kid, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
once you're a parent, you are a parent, and then you know the majority of other sorts of decisions or paths or things we talk about are you can unwind or retroactively like change to some degree. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you go down a career path, you can do a different one. If you started going to school and failed or whatever, like you can keep trying, or like you can. But once I feel like you have to have enough conviction, I think I'll say,
Mm-hmm.
if you're trying to have a kid on purpose,
Right.
that you are prepared for your life to change in a drastic and like very meaningful way.
Yeah.
So I can see how it would be very easy to be extremely emotionally invested. I almost said too invested, but that's not what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like because the decision is one of such like weight and consequence,
Mm-hmm.
that again, I just don't know that there's not many choices that I can think of that have the same sort of like heft to them. So when you have sort of mentally prepared, at least to some degree, for like a positive outcome, or
Mm-hmm.
like the intended outcome, not getting it, I feel like is very likely to just like weigh heavier than a lot of things, which is me again just saying like I think it makes sense to give yourself extra space.
Definitely. Yeah. No, absolutely. You need the extra space because it is having a child is a life altering, changing thing that, thankfully, probably 10 years ago, I would not be prepared to have a child because of where I was at with my emotional development. But, over the last 10 to 20 years, I've been putting a lot of work in my own personal growth and development. And I do feel like strongly that conviction that I would be a great mother because I've worked so much on myself to overcome a lot of like insecurities and self-doubts and like just personal issues that I've struggled with of feeling not good enough or the common things we experience. And so to know that I have all these tools that I don't get to impart on my own little human being that I'm creating would be kind of devastating in itself because I know, I would create an amazing kind child in the world.
Here is a related question that came up for me, but it's a little bit of a topic switch,
Mm-hmm.
which is I'm curious, like, have you always had such a strong conviction to have kids, or was there sort of a process to get to the point where you sort of felt like, okay, now seems like a good time, or
Mm-hmm.
like now I'm ready,
Mm-hmm.
separate from partner issues?
Right. I am one of those people that had always had a strong conviction of wanting kids since I was like a kid, basically. I wanted to have kids. I was one of those people that was sure of it, even when, like friends and some family members were not certain of that. And even, my partner though, my current partner, he was unsure when we first met. So I was like, oh, I don't think this is going to go anywhere because my last relationship didn't work out because he was unsure. So I was like, yeah, not expecting anything out of that. But he came around because for him, he he needed like a certain amount of time. He needed to get things more in place. He needed to like spend time with my niece and nephew to be around kids, have exposure to kids. Because basically the story, and I've shared this probably in the past, of how my partner and I kind of went from just kind of being more casual, not expecting it to work out, to serious, him moving across the country so we could stay together, was that factor of whether or not he wants kids. Because we met on the East Coast while I was trying to like wrap up my business and move to California to be near my family. And so we were dating. We weren't expecting it to go anywhere. I wasn't expecting it to go anywhere because I was moving and he was unsure about kids. So I was like, even though I love him and there's an amazing connection here, I have to put my values of what I want out of life, which is kids, as a bigger priority than this relationship, even though there's like a lot of love and connection there. And so basically what happened is I moved in February of 2019 to California, and he helped me with the drive across the country. And he spent some time with my niece and nephew in California before he decided to fly back to DC. And we decided together that he would take like a week to really think about what he wants out of life. And that's when he kind of got into action and asked friends and family, pros and cons of being a parent, and like doing his own personal like reflection, self-development reflection, and asking around to come to that decision for himself. And then he took that week, really thought about it. I was like, I'm not going to pressure you because this really has to come from you. So that really took something. So then he decided he does want to have kids, and he moved out here a few months later after he wrapped up his job. But there were struggles still, because he would waver from like fears of like, oh, what if we don't have everything we need before we have a kid? We want to make sure everything's like just right and perfect before we have a kid. Like that was getting in our way of like starting. And so it wasn't all perfect and butterflies. And we even broke up once over like not being quite like almost on the same page, but not quite on the same page. It wasn't until we worked with like some couples coaches to kind of help us through those breakdowns and finally get on the same page of trying at the same time.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you shared that piece of the story too, because there's just more to look at than your half of the story of just like, I just want to have kids and I know I do, and that's it, settled.
Yeah, nope.
But I think it's useful to hear sort of some of the process of what your partner went through as he was trying to like get to that level of conviction, to the point of like, okay, this is something that I want to do for sure.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and I don't know, maybe it's well, no, I guess it depends on the person, because I have a couple guy friends who have known they wanted kids for the entire time.
Yeah.
But I think it does depend on the person. I think it's so important to like, I definitely know a few people who have had kids because they felt pressured into it, or because I don't know, there's just like an expectation. I mean, being from Utah, there's like kids everywhere, so like there's like an extra helping of like, where's my grandkids, like an extra dose. But I have seen that, and like the people I'm thinking of are like, they make it work and do their best and whatever else, but hard to believe that that's like the optimal path that they could have picked. Anyway, all that is just to say that like, I do think it's really important. Like I think maybe occasionally some people underweight how seriously it will alter the course of your life and future forever.
Yeah, definitely, because it does involve, well, if you're in a relationship and you're planning to have a child with that person, you can have a kid on your own, and then you don't have to deal with all that other stuff of like where they're at and all that, which was my plan. If I didn't meet anyone, and by X amount of time, I would be like, yeah, I'm going to have a kid regardless if I'm involved with someone or not. But, the ideal was to be with someone who wanted kids just the same. But it was a struggle for sure to quite get on the same page. So, but I definitely wouldn't want to force someone into having a kid when they weren't sure, because it's like, it's like, this is a life-changing decision for both of us. So you need to be on board fully if we're gonna do this. Yeah.
Well, I think the path that you sort of shared are like this sort of different approaches, or I guess part of its nature, right? Like for whatever reason, you felt that strongly for the whole time. But I feel like illuminating that path a little bit will be useful for people as they're sort of navigating this and all the pieces that you shared of your actual individual journey. Because there's Another thing that I've seen somewhat commonly is people like, oh, cool, I want to have kids. That's for sure something I want to do. And
Mhm.
then they get into the process, or they
Mhm.
actually have their kids, and they're just like,
Yeah.
this is a lot of work. Like this,
Yeah.
or this is hard, or like whatever uh the things are that they didn't expect. So I feel like that'll help people adjust their expectations a little bit and have a little more of an idea um what they might experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, I think we talked about this maybe in our values episode of regards to relationships. If you are one of those people that have the strong convictions that you definitely want to have kids, and you're with someone who's kind of like on the fence about it, not one way or another, it's like, it's perfectly fair. No matter how much you love that person, sometimes love is not sufficient to sustain the relationship, because what's going to happen is, like, what if that person decides not to have kids? They never get off the fence. Like my ex, they never got off the fence. And so you don't have the kid, and then you're resentful, and that's going to really kind of eat away at the relationship over time. So it's like, you know, if they're on the fence, they can either choose to proactively try to get off the fence one way or another, figure it out for themselves, or you have to set the boundary or the limit, like, I'll give this X amount of months or X amount of years for some people, but there should be a time limit. I get you have to take time to get to know a person to see if there's a foundation, but if, like, those major life values aren't in alignment, it makes it so much harder, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, it makes it impossible, basically. But yeah, like I think it makes a lot of sense to work towards finding the answer to those questions. And like you said, if the amount of time it takes the other person to figure that out, because for some people
Yeah.
it can take
Yeah.
forever,
Right.
then they're big enough, issues. Keep using words I don't want to use, but they're big enough like
Mhm.
value differences that you're not going like you said, if one person ends up resentful, it's not
Mhm.
going to lead the relationship into a good place. And it's what I mentioned before. Like I've seen it from the other side where people felt so pressured into having kids that they decided to have kids, even though
Mhm.
they didn't necessarily want to. And that's potentially even more catastrophic. Like I
Yeah.
said, the people I've seen have tried their best to make it work. It's not like horrible, but obviously, as a child, it would be more ideal if
Yeah.
both of your parents were on board.
Right. Yeah, because then it's like, if you have a kid and you were like, oh, well, I never even really officially wanted this kid, I was pressuring it, then that resentment's gonna eat away at the relationship over time, and that's not good either. All right, well, I think we covered this story journey topic um pretty in depth, and if you are someone that's struggling with your own fertility journey, feel free to share, reach out, send a DM or write in the comments and share your story, and get the support that you need. And as always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the things that help spread happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.